So go ahead and take your slides out if you haven't already for unit 2.5. And we are going to take a look at what is one of the shorter units throughout the entire class. So it's good that you kind of get a break from like super heavy stuff. And we're going to dive back into some heavy stuff next, because we're going to go back into license law. But right now we kind of get a little bit of a break. This is a very lightweight section that deals with property description. I don't think you'll see many questions from here. I'm going to try to keep it focused on the things that I really do think you will see as potential test items. It is important that we have a set and valid legal description for every piece of land, because those deeds, remember we talked about the importance of deeds and how important that document is, but not just deeds, leases, all kinds of legal documents make references to real estate. Deeds especially have to be readable and understandable years and years and years after the fact. That's why we don't want to use things like addresses. How many of you have ever experienced an address changing for a property? Like it used to be one address and now it's a different address.
Yes.
If we use things like addresses on deeds, that would create a problem, because when you started to go back over time and research, well, what's the previous deed to this property? You'd be like, well, is that the same property? They're different addresses. So we don't use addresses as the way to refer to property on legal documents. What we use is this thing called a legal description. The whole idea of a legal description is it is meant to be a description of the land which is permanent, which lasts forever, so that every deed that's ever recorded on that property can have the same exact description. So you can easily see this is all the same property. And what we want to talk about in this section is just the systems that we use to describe property.
And just kind of wanted to do this because I'm not linear thinker. There are going to be three types that we're going to discuss.
There are going to be three types. There really are two primary ones. The third one is kind of a shortcut method. But the two primary ways to describe property are something called the meets and bounds system of property description. And those are the states that you see in green here on this map. Those are states that use the meets and bounds, which basically is the original 13 colonies, plus Texas also uses it. And then every state that you see in yellow on here uses the government rectangular system, or just the rectangular system of surveying property, which is a lot why when you fly across, you know, this part of the country, when you, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Back up. When you fly across this part of the country and you look out the window, everything looks like it's in a grid pattern, right?
I've always wondered why in the plane, I never saw that in like North Carolina.
You don't see that because we use a completely different system. Our system of property description is mostly based on natural boundaries. So I saw a question in the chat. Julie asks, is this why it's difficult or impossible to find deeds per an address? Yes, because deeds are not tied to an address. Deeds are tied to the legal description of the property. And the legal description is very different from the address of the property. So I guess the best way to think of, you know, like address versus legal description. Let's think of people, like your name is your address.
Yeah.
It's easy to find somebody based on their name, but they could do what?
Change it.
They could change their name, which would complicate things. Your social security number is your legal description. You
Right.
change your name all you want to, but guess what's never changing from the minute you're born to the minute you die?
Your social security barcode.
That social security number ain't changing, right?
Now, I will say too, you just, you know, because I like to throw this out there. Like, you know, a common medication name, and then you have the actual pharmaceutical name, or Yeah.
Well,
that's
right.
all I wanted.
One might be a brand name and that could change over time, whereas the other is like the chemical compound name. So basically property descriptions are just more detailed and permanent. They never change. Now, in North Carolina, we use what's known as the meets and bounds method of describing property. It is a very simple method of describing property because it's based on mapping the perimeter, the outside edge of the property. A meets and bounds property description is sort of like a scavenger hunt. If you were to, so imagine, I'm going to go to a blank screen here for just a second so I can draw something for you. And I'm a terrible artist, which we've already seen before. But imagine if you have a situation where you're trying to figure out where the property boundaries are for a lot, and it's located at the intersection of like Main Street and Elm Drive. Okay, so you got Main Street here and Elm here. And the property that we want to find the boundaries of is somewhere there. Here's what the meets and bounds method of describing that property is. It would say something like, beginning at the intersection of Elm Drive and Main Street. Isn't that right there? Wouldn't that be the,
Yes.
and it would say, continue west for 120 feet. So you would literally measure from that point and you would go west for 120 feet and you would stop. And then it would say, you know, turn to the north and go 80 feet. So you would turn and you would use a compass and you would go north for 80 feet. And then it would say, and then turn and go due west for 120 feet. And then turn and go south for 80 feet. Well, guess where you're always going to end up with a meets and bounds description? Right back where you what?
Begin.
Begin.
Right back where you began. This is how a meets and bounds property description works. So basically, here's the plus of it. It's very straightforward to understand the process. It's just a series of directions that walk you around the perimeter of the property. Of course, it gets more complex if the property has like unusual borders, you know, like you have a lot more turns. You could have a property that, you know, for example, is shaped like this, you know, type thing. And you would just have a lot more turns and a lot more directions in there. But here's the downside of the meets and bounds property description. Somebody has to physically visit this property.
And not mute this person.
Let the alien pass.
Who is that?
It's an alien.
What is that?
God almighty.
Well, is that, I don't know. I hit mute all and it didn't go away. Who was it?
I think it might have been Christina because I couldn't mute her.
Well, I mean, I'm
but-
not trying to pick on whoever. I just
No.
It was weird that I
My head
couldn't,
hurts now.
I couldn't make it go away. So oh well.
I think it might have just been recurring, you know,
Maybe.
when you muted.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, it sounded like somebody had two computers or switching devices or switching to headphones or something. But normally when I hit mute everybody, it goes away instantly. So I apologize about that. But this system does require somebody to physically visit the property. To physically go to the property and walk the perimeter. Cher asked, can a property reside in two different counties? It can. Yes, it can. Jay, you got a question?
Yeah, what happens when Main Street is widened to accommodate a turn lane?
Well, remember we talked about when that happens, we're going to have to redraw that property line, because if they come through and they widen Main Street, what legal process is the city probably going to go through to take that property and convert it?
Domain.
eminent domain. And what would happen then is we would have to have a new legal description that would then describe from here to here.
And is that updated information then recorded for a new deed?
It is not only, yes, and not only a new deed, but a new plat map
Okay.
showing the new boundaries of the property. Absolutely.
And it's the owner
What
that
if
has
the
to do
building
that?
owner, how you supposed to move it?
It would be whoever was handling in that case in particular, it would probably be the state or city that was taking the property as part of the taking process would have a surveyor redraw and remap this and record a new map with the new boundaries.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that is what the meets and bounds does everybody understand the idea of the meets and bounds description of property? It basically points you to a spot and says begin right here, and then gives you a series of directions. And as long as you follow those directions, you will always end back up where?
In the
At the
beginning.
beginning.
At the beginning. We actually call that the point of beginning. And all those places where we turn along the way are called monuments or markers. Now, 200 years ago, they used natural objects as monuments or markers. They would have made the property line be like a big tree or a big rock or a stream. Now we drive iron stakes in the ground and we simply say, okay, you measure this and there's an iron stake there. And so if you ever see a surveyor who's out trying to establish the property lines, one of the major tools you'll see them use is a metal detector. What are they looking for?
Those things in the ground.
They're looking for that metal stake that was driven in the ground when it was first mapped out so that they can reestablish where those property lines actually are. That is the meets and bounds system of describing property. And again, it just takes you clockwise around the property until you come back to where you started. And that's used in North Carolina. So every single piece of land in North Carolina has a meets and bounds description. And that meets and bounds description will never change unless the land is changed. So like with Jay's question, if we are changing the boundaries, if we're moving the property lines, if we're subdividing the property, the new lot is going to get a new legal description.
Mm-hmm.
Rose, you had a question?
What if there's already a house or something on the lot?
I'm just trying to find out if it really, you guys are gonna have to pardon me.
Okay.
Does it really make a difference to go counterclockwise to clockwise when you actually, go from point of beginning?
Well, they say it does. So, I mean, it will always, the directions will always be listed in a clockwise way. Yeah. It won't make a difference for you on the test, no, but in the real world, they follow the directions clockwise. I heard someone, and I'm not sure who it was, I apologize. I heard the question.
It was me.
It was Brendan. You asked, does it matter if there's already a house? Remember, we don't care about the structures, we care about the land. So in some cases, you will on rare occasion find situations where there might be a lot line.
If they want to like cut my front yard in half, they can do it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Heard.
Absolutely. Because they don't care about the structure. It's all about the land. Okay. Now, other states use the government rectangular survey. If you fly across the middle and western part of the United States and you looked out the window of the plane, most of you have seen something that looks like this. This is not accidental. These people did not just stumble. This you do not find in North Carolina. How many of you have moved from another part of the country and you're shocked to find in North Carolina that we have streets that go in circles and we have that nothing is a 90-degree angle and you cross the same street like 12 times? Yeah, those of you that have moved from other parts of the country, it's a lot harder to navigate around here, right? Because when you're from the Midwest or you're from the Western part, everything is a right angle. Everything is a 90-degree angle. You go this many streets this way and you take a right and you go that many streets that way. It always works that way because it was originally laid out on a grid. Our land was never done that way. This is part of the westward expansion of the United States. This was what was decided to be the most reasonable way to develop land as the United States moved westward, was to simply put a grid line on the property and divide it into a big grid work. And the entire western part of the United States is divided that way. Here's what is very interesting about that grid work pattern that you see right there. These rectangles right here are all the same size. The big rectangles you see there are called, and you're going to need to know this terminology. The big rectangles that you see there are called townships. So the blue lines are called townships. Within each township, you have another smaller grid work. Oops, I did too many. I messed that up. I put too many lines.
Hey, like Shakira says, try everything.
So you have a smaller grid work here within each township. These are called sections. They are also all the same size. There are 36 sections. You need to know that number. 36 sections in every what? What's the bigger one? Is township? What's bigger, a township or a section?
Township.
Nope.
Township.
Okay. No, Marianne, Raleigh is not on a grid. Certainly not. And cities that are in the eastern part of the United States are almost never on grids, okay? Because we use the meets and bounds system. So a township is much larger. There are 36 sections within a township. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, and they are all always the same size. Here's why that is useful. This slide is super important right here. This slide is super important for test taking and purposes.
It's pertinent to the test.
It is a pertinent to the test. Every section is 1 square mile of land. So if we go back, and I'm gonna go back for a second and look in that picture. This box right here is 1 section. That is also what? One what?
Square mile.
1 square mile. What that means is it is a mile wide and a mile deep. That little red box is 1 mile wide and 1 mile deep. And how many of those red boxes are there in a township?
36.
36.
36 of them. Here's another really important number. 1 square mile, which is the same as 1 section, is also equal to 640 acres of land. So that red box right there is how many acres?
640.
640.
640 acres. Folks, is 640 acres a large piece of land?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. When you think about the fact, just for reference purposes, not something you need to know for test taking purposes, but I want to give you a visual reference. Think of a football field, an American football field. That is 1 acre of land. So imagine the size of a full-size American football field. That is
640 of those.
640 of those is that little red box.
Crazy.
That is a big piece of land. So if somebody purchases a section, this is how it's going to be worded on the test. If somebody purchases a section of land, how many acres have they purchased?
640.
640.
If somebody purchases a square mile, how many acres have they purchased?
640.
640.
640. That is a lot of land. 1 square mile or 1 section is equal to 640 acres of land. Now, I think we can probably all agree that we need to break that down a little bit. In other words, not every lot is going to be sold in 640 acre increments, right? They still have half-acre lots in Nebraska, right?
Yes, could you explain township one more time, please? Or
So
define?
a township is 36 sections. A section is 1 square mile. So a township is 36 of those, 6 wide.
The bigger
6
square.
It's a bigger square. That's all it is. It's always a square. And so the township is 36 of those red squares.
Yep.
So if you
Thank
wanted to
you.
know how many acres would be in a township, it would be 640 times what?
36.
36.
Right, 640 times 36 would give you the number of acres in a township. It's a lot.
23,040.
It's a lot.
Just an observance. It's weird that Texas is not like this.
Yeah, and there's a
I
historical
think.
there's a historical note there because here's the reason.
I think it was one of the first states after the 13 colonies.
Well, here is the more specific reason. Texas was originally Mexico, and Mexico had adopted the English common law system, which is the same system of law that the colonial United States used. And so when Texas was admitted to the United States, it had already been mapped using the meets and bounds system because Mexico was using the same legal system that the early United States was. And so that's why it ended up as the outlier.
Yep, it just really stands out looking at that map back there.
Yeah.
So do we all understand that the township is much larger than the section, first of all?
Yes.
Good on that?
Yes.
Okay, now, the township much larger. Also, make sure you know that a section is 1 square mile of land, which is also how many acres?
640.
640.
Because
Acres.
on the test, that you could present it either way. They could present it as a section or as a square mile. Either way, it equals 640. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Good. So how do we break that down even further? It looks super complex. I'm here to tell you it's the simplest thing in the world. This right here, and I'm going to zoom in on it. This is what a government rectangular survey description looks like. And here's what it would sound like if I read it. The northern half of the southern half of the southwestern quarter of the northeastern quarter of the eastern half of the southeastern quarter of section 18, township 3 north, 4 east. That's what a government rectangular description looks like, which sounds super complex, right?
Yes.
Except it's not. It's actually the easiest thing in the world to work with. The easiest, because it's consistent. Look at this verbiage right here. Don't we know exactly how big section 18 is?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
How
640
big is,
acres.
how big? It's 640.
640 acres.
Does it matter if it says section 18 or section 3 or section 2 or
No.
section 27? No.
Well,
All how big?
640.
640 acres, every section.
Every section, which is the same thing as 1 square mile, equals 640 acres. So all you have to know is find the word section and substitute 640 for the word section. Can you do that?
Right. And, you know,
Yes.
people aren't going to buy an entire section to live on. So this is why they break it down.
So here's what they're actually doing with this thing, folks. They're just breaking it down in smaller and smaller pieces. All we've got to do is do the division. all we've got to do is do the division. Can you get that, Seth, please?
Got it.
We are going to simply say, divide it by what? They're not buying all of section 18. Just work your way backwards. They're buying the
So it's a quarter.
southeastern quarter of
By the
section.
half, by the half, by the quarter, by the quarter.
But
by
then
the
they're
half.
not buying all of that either. They're also only buying half of that. And they're only buying a quarter of that and a quarter of that and half of that and half of that. Folks, just take 640 and get your calculator, pick your calculator up, type 640 in, and then all those denominators, just hit divided by, divided by, divided by, divided by, until you've typed all the denominators in, and that will tell you the size of the lot they just purchased.
Pretty easy.
Very.
So literally all you're going to type into the calculator is going to be 640 divided by 2, divided by 2, divided by 4, divided by 4, divided by 2, divided by 4. How much land did they purchase here?
1.25
0.25.
acres.
1.25 acres. Now tell me how complicated that is.
Not at all.
That's it. That's all there is to it, folks. It is a very simple way of breaking property down. Could we pretty much break this thing down to any size lot that we wanted?
Yes,
Yeah, because if we wanted to go even smaller, couldn't we just stick another like half or quarter in front of it and we would be dividing that by half or quarter?
Yeah.
And it's always halves and quarters.
I was about to say that. You read my mind.
It's always halves and quarters. That's it. So you're always dividing by 2 or dividing by 4. So look at this one. You're already ready. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I have a question on that slide, the previous one, like where you showed us the math equation. Hello.
Yeah, I'm
Hey,
listening.
you're here. I stopped the
We
video.
stopped,
so
we
you could
stopped
get
your
the
video
share.
because your audio is super choppy. Your bandwidth is bad, so it helps with the audio. Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. So my question is, so I understand the math here, but like we're reading, let's say number 1, where you said north, south, like all those descriptions. Are you getting all that 2 and 4 from that description? Because my question would be, then I understand where the 4, but where is the 3 north? How?
Here's the thing, Sharon. Sharon, here's the thing. Sharon, you listening to me? You ready? You
Yes.
don't need to know any of that. You know why you don't need to know any of that, Sharon? We don't use this where?
In North Carolina.
In North Carolina. You only need to know what they're going to ask you about this system on the national section of the licensing exam. The rest of it, in fact, in a perfect world, I wouldn't be teaching you this at all. Why am I teaching you this? Only because it might show up where?
On the national section.
On the national section of the test. You're never going to encounter this in North Carolina because we don't use the government rectangular survey. And the only way they can ask a test question about the government rectangular survey deals with the math. So as soon as you said you understand the math, you know what my thought was? Then frozen, baby. Let it go. That's all. I mean, and I get it. It's a great question, but you don't need to know anything further about the government rectangular survey because it's not used here. Okay. It's just not used here. So look at this question, because this is something that you would have to deal with it on the test. It says, how many acres are contained in the property described as the northwestern quarter of the southeastern quarter of the western half of the southern half of the southwestern quarter of section 22, township 3 north, 4 east. So I want you to take just a second. I want you to do it on your own and see if you come up with the number of acres here.
How many?
I like those numbers that I'm seeing there. I come up with the same
Exactly.
thing. I come up with the same thing, 2.5 acres, 2.5 acres, 640 divided by all those. If you can do that, folks, you can handle a government rectangular survey question on the test.
This should be a very easy one to knock out when you
Yeah,
see it.
you can handle that. So sometimes, and about the only way they could, I don't even think this makes it complex, but I just want to show you this in case you see it on a test. Sometimes they will give you two descriptions with the word and in the middle. Mathematically, the word and means what?
Add.
Add.
Plus.
So look at
Plus,
this question. How many acres are contained in the property described as? And they give you two descriptions. What are you going to do?
Divide
add them
and.
together. Divide and add.
Add the acres
Figure
together.
out,
Add them together.
figure out each one separately and then add them together. So do this one. All right, I'm gonna take a look at it. When I do the first one here, I get 640 divided by 4, divided by 2, divided by 2, divided by 4, divided by 2. See if I can do that in my head. That's 320, that's 160, that's 80, that's
If I
20.
can flex that mental muscle.
Exactly. 640 divided by 4, I'm sorry, is 160, is divided by 2 is 80, divided by 2 is 40, divided by 4 is 10, divided by 2. I get 5 acres on the first description. Sound about right?
Oh, yes, it does.
And then on the second one, I got 640 divided by 2, divided by 4, divided by 4, divided by 2, divided by 2. So that's 640 divided by 2 is 320, divided by 4 is 80, divided by 4 is 20, divided by 2 is 10, divided by 2 is 5 again. I don't recommend you do it that way. Use the calculator. Add them together, 10 acres. Folks, and listen, how many of y'all were stressing about the math?
So easy.
There's
You
eight.
don't want to hit equal, right?
There's 8 math questions on the test. This is one of them. Don't tell me you can't do the math.
So if you go through that and do all that math and you hit equal, it's 0.2.
Yeah, don't hit equals on each one.
Don't hit equal.
Just divided by. Okay.
Yeah, you just got to remember those two key things, the township and the section.
That's it. So I'm going to make up a question real quick. Oops. I'm going to make up a question and I want you to do it just so you kind of make sure you're good at this. Seth is purchasing 1 square mile and the northern half of the southern half of the southwestern quarter of the northeastern quarter of section 24 township 1 east to south. How many acres? That is absolutely probably more complex than the way they would give it to you on the test, but as complex as it can possibly be made.
I got it.
Wow, I see some
It's
differences.
10.
650 because you got to add.
Yes, 60.
There we go.
So if he's purchasing 1 square mile, how much is that? How many acres is that?
640.
Already 640 acres.
640 plus he's purchasing separate, the separate total of this. And if I do the math for that one, I come up with 10 acres. So a total of what?
650.
650.
650. Is anybody not seeing where that comes from? The 1 square mile is 640 acres plus the 10 from the next description, total of 650 acres. Can you handle it?
Yeah, that's easy.
Yep.
There's one of your math questions. Okay. Don't freak out about the math, I promise.
No.
Don't let yourself do that. So that covers the two major property description methods.
Travis, I'm sorry. I just have a quick question really quick on the very first question where it says, where it had the two different answers, but it was 10 acres was the answer. Yeah, that one. So if you notice on the first one, it says section 12 township, it tells you the section. And in the second one, it just says township. So how do we?
Yeah, that's, I just made a mistake. It should be section in there.
Oh, okay, so they'll
correct
never
it.
say just township. So
Yeah.
because I was thinking it was going to be like the whole.
No, it'll say section. I apologize.
What slide is
Okay,
that, Travis?
Slide number
I can find it.
is side 252 on ours.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we need a shortcut for this, and the shortcut works in every state, whether you're in a meets and bounds state or a government rectangular state. The shortcut.
And this is the third.
This is the third method, which relies on the other two. Basically, every lot already has a permanent description, and surveyors have already mapped every lot. When they mapped it, they recorded that picture. What do we call that picture that gets recorded of these lots when they're subdivided?
Plat.
Flat map.
Plat map. That plat map already has the legal description for each property on it. So rather than each one of our documents, our deeds, our contracts containing the full legal description, it's a little bit of a shortcut method to just say, go look at the plat map that's already been recorded. In other words, give them a reference point. Isn't it easier? Like I'll try to give you a little bit of an analogy here. If somebody said, what's your recipe for apple pie? Would you sit down for 15 minutes and write out the whole recipe? Or would you just say, oh, well, I found it on Food Network. Go to Food Network and type apple pie recipe and you'll get the recipe. Which is easier?
Go to Food
Go to
Network.
the internet.
Give them
Google
the
it.
shortcut. Go to Food Network. Here's where you can find the recipe that I used. And so when we're using the reference to a plat map, we're basically taking the plat map that's already publicly available, already been recorded, and saying, we're selling lot number 3 on this map. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yep.
And so that's what we use a lot of times as a shortcut for us, so that we don't have to put the full length legal description on our documents. We'll just say, look at the plat map that's recorded in book number 1979, page 380, lot number 4.
That same
So
thing
all
that
the
you when you were
previous
showing.
questions, we can just say see plat map.
You can it's the same thing that you
Sorry.
showed for when no, you're good, when you were showing the easements and carrying.
That's exactly right. We looked at that plat map when we were talking about easements. And so if I was selling one of those lots on that plat map, I would simply say, go to this book and page. That's where the plat map is, lot number 127. And right there, not only would they have a picture of the lot that we're selling, but the actual legal description of that lot is also there as well. So it's a very nice little shortcut method that we use to describe property. The only other thing that I think you could be tested on from this section, and I told you it was a very brief section, is simply converting area from acres into square feet and vice versa, square feet into acres. Area can be measured in square footage or in acreage, just like weight can be measured in ounces or pounds. You know, just like when you measure, if you were measuring the length of your driveway, you could measure it in inches or you could measure it in feet. They both accomplish the same thing. Why would we not measure our driveway in inches? Why would we not say that my driveway is, you know, 489 inches long? Why would we not do that?
Numbers too large.
Big.
It's a big number, right? So we would simplify that down and be like, oh, well, it's 22 feet long. Does everybody see the difference there? Right? They both are the same thing. Why do we not say, I mean, so I'm gonna do something ugly here for myself. Why do I not say that I weigh 4,832 ounces?
This is a better way to say it.
Because that's a big, ugly ass number, right? I don't even like it when I state it as pounds. I sure don't want to state it as ounces, right? Does everybody, but aren't they really the same measurement?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So acreage and square footage is just two ways of measuring the same thing. In other words, we generally could say that a lot is 72,000 square feet. We don't usually do that. Usually when we're talking about land, we measure it in what?
Square feet.
Land?
Acreage.
Acres.
Because it 70 some thousand square feet is like 1.7 acres, right?
You know, if you look on the tax records or something, it'll say like how many acres.
Right. When we're measuring the inside of a house, we usually use what?
Square feet.
Square feet.
But we could technically say, so my house is, do the math real quick.
0.1 acre.
My house is 0.04 acres of living area. But everybody would be like, I don't know how big that is. So what we need to be able to do is convert between acreage and square footage, even though they measure the same thing. Is that clicking for everybody? What's going on here?
Can you imagine showing a buyer property and they're like 0.005 acres is like too much?
How big is the house? How big is the house? And you're like, oh, it's 0.04 acres. I don't mean the yard. I mean, no, that's the house. It's not going to work, you know? So we need to be able to flip the script back and forth between acreage and square footage. Now, that's where our friend, the TBar, Christina said she's having a problem. Not sure if I need to divide or multiply. That's where the TBar is your friend. The TBar, when you put something into a TBar, remember, is just a visual way of writing out a formula so that you never have to think about whether you are dividing or multiplying. The TBar tells you whether you are dividing or multiplying. So all you have to do is remember where the things are in the TBar. They never move, because if two things are side by side, here and here, what do we do with them?
Multiply.
We multiply. If something is top and bottom, what do we do with it?
Divide.
We divide, right? So when you look at like a TBar, in this example, if I wanted to know A, I look to the other two things. The other two things are side by side. So what would I do with them?
Multiply.
Right. So A equals B times C. Well, how about if I wanted to know, let's say I wanted to know what B equals. I would look at the other two things. So B equals A and C, and then what symbol am I going to put between them?
Divided.
Division. See, the TBar tells you exactly what to do in that regard. Here's why that's going to be so useful, because when we give you this formula, now you can always convert acreage into square feet, or go the opposite direction and convert square footage into acres. So just look at the way this is set up. Don't think. It doesn't require thought. If I know how many or I want to know how many acres I have, what am I going to do? I'm going to take the total number of what?
Square feet.
Square feet, and do what with it?
Divided by 43,560.
Divided by 43,560. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Right? Or if they ask me in the question, oh, but we don't want to know square feet. We don't want to know acres. We want to know square feet. Does the formula tell me what to do there?
Yes,
Just take the number of acres and do what with it?
multiply.
Multiply. Here's what you need to know about this. This is a formula. Things never move in a formula. You don't move stuff around. You don't put stuff on the top. And so on this formula, when you've got acres, square feet, and 43,560, what always goes on the top?
Square feet.
Square feet. Where does acres go? On the bottom, right?
Left.
Now, to me, the only challenge of the math in converting acres to square footage is memorizing this number. 43,560 is the magic number, because that's how many square feet are in an acre. Just like there are 12 inches in a foot, or there are 16 ounces in a pound. And yes, we're the only stupid country that still uses the imperial measurement system rather than the metric system.
You beat me to it.
It's so ridiculous, so ridiculous. But that it's just a way of converting. And the classic way to remember this is 4 little old ladies going 35 and a 60. That has it has been the most successful for me over the years, to just think about 4 little old ladies going down the road doing 35 and a 60. And that is how you can remember this number. 4 little old ladies doing 35 and a 60. 43,560 is the magic number. Okay. I love the picture. The picture's great, isn't it? The best. There's some good conversation going on right there.
Yeah.
They are not in a hurry. They got nowhere to be. Okay. So that is the way to remember the number. The formula takes care of itself after that. So the conversions become relatively simple. So here, let's look at one. This says convert the following: 12 and a half acres to square feet. So they want to know square feet. They want to know square footage right here. What are we going to do?
Multiply.
Fill in the formula.
We're going to fill it in. 12 and a half acres times, because it's side by side, 43,560. How many square feet do we have here?
544.
144,500.
544,000 some odd.
500.
Yes.
Yep, 544,500.
Yes.
That's right. And so I've just given you several examples here. Convert this one, 1.5 acres to square footage.
$65,340.
Yep. 65,340 sounds about right to me. And I'm going to skip ahead here because I think y'all are probably okay with it. We can go the other direction. Look at this one. It says convert 172,800 square feet into acres. Well, in this case, they want to know acres, but you can still just fill your formula in, right? 172,800 square feet. Am I multiplying this time though, or am I dividing?
Dividing.
I'm dividing 172,800 divided by 43,560. That is
966
3.9.
3.9669.
4.
So let's have a conversation here about rounding. Some of you will freak out. I don't really care if you wrote down 3.97 acres. I really don't care if you wrote down 3.96 acres. Rounding's not going to make a difference in this class, folks. Don't stress out about it. Here's what I generally do. I generally just go 4 past the decimal and don't round at all. That way I know I've kind of just, I've taken it far enough out that it's not a big deal. But either way, remember it's a multiple choice test and they're not going to have both 3.97 and 3.96 as answers. You know, if you come up with, if your answer is 3.96 and the answer choices are 3.97 or 4.05, which one are you going to choose?
3.97.
3.97. Don't freak out.
Or 7.
Right. You just don't. There's no need to stress yourself out about that. Okay. Don't get stressed about that at all.
No.
How do we all feel about doing that conversion? Pretty good?
Good.
Yeah, that was good.
Folks, that's it for 2.5 as well. Look at that.
Wow.
You made it sound so easy though.
Oh, it is.
We travel